Alrighty, folks, looks like we are live here with my friend Lester. I am George. I'm one of the founders of Solo Suit. We're going to be talking about, debt lawsuits and a lot of things related to them today. A lot of you guys are probably being sued for debt right now. That's one of the reasons why I've come to Solo Suit. So we're going to be talking about how to settle a judgment debt. And Lester is a policy expert on debt and debt lawsuits. Can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lester Bird. In my day job, I work for the Pew Charitable Trust, where I work on a team focused on sort of our nation's court system and the impacts it's having on communities around the country. The last few years, I've led our work looking at debt collection lawsuits in particular, trying to understand sort of what's going on in these cases, who's getting sued, what sort of amounts people are getting sued for, and then sort of what's happening to people as they navigate the sort of complexities of the civil court system, typically without a lawyer.
Awesome. Fantastic. As well as right in line with what we do.
Yeah.
Great. So Pew. So folks, Pew is like the research guys, right? They do a lot of the surveys. They publish a lot of awesome data on all kinds of topics. Lester, how long have you been with Pew?
I've been at Pew now for 8.5 years, and then working on the court's work for the last 6.
Nice. And I suppose, are you kind of working in the data, or are you doing more of like the policy recommendation side?
I get to do both, which is sort of fun. So I get to dig into the data, sort of look at what's going on, and then sort of work with policymakers on sort of better solutions, and then hopefully help them implement those solutions as well. So yeah, I get to sort of cover the full spectrum of sort of research to sort of policy being put into action.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that is great. Imagine you know how to make some pretty awesome graphs.
Pretty good at it.
Nice. Oh, great. Cool. So, where to start? My understanding is that you have done quite a bit of research in this space, right? Let's just start off with a kind of basic question here. What is your experience with seeing consumers and creditors reach settlement in this space?
Yeah, I think this is probably a good place to start for people visiting visiting this site. I think in debt collection lawsuits, right, what we sort of see is most people are not engaging in these lawsuits around the country. So when someone's getting sued, most of the time a person's not even sort of able to either navigate the process to get to court, right, filing an answer and things like that in places where it's required. And we generally see a pretty high default rate, somewhere around 60 to 70% of these cases result in an automatic win for whoever brought this lawsuit. But when we see people who make it through the process, show up to court, and are able to engage, sort of the very first thing typically that we see for people is that they will be sort of herded into a settlement with the sort of plaintiff lawyer who has sued them. Typically before they see a judge, before they even get to talk about sort of the merits of whether there's a defense to the debt that they might owe, they're going to be sort of routed into a settlement hearing to sort of navigate a sort of negotiation with a creditor's attorney on one side, themselves on the other, and sort of the guys on the other side are pretty skilled at negotiating and trying to come to agreements. So that's generally what we see. We do generally, though, also see when people can engage in these cases, when they can sort of come up with settlements, that's oftentimes a better outcome for people when they owe the debt, when they don't have any legal defenses to the debt that they might owe. Settlement's generally going to be your best option. Not always, but most of the time. Trying to avoid sort of garnishment and sort of that forcible seizure of your wages or your bank account or your personal property is probably the best outcome for most people. If you can't settle these debts, sort of getting to a place where 25% of your paycheck's being taken, your bank account's getting wiped out to $0, that's going to lead to a lot more, sort of cascading financial consequences for a person beyond just this debt.
Right. Okay, so you guys think of settlement as the ideal outcome oftentimes for consumers in this position?
I don't know if it's always the ideal outcome, but I think it's often, the most preferred outcome. Typically when a person's getting sued, it's the debt that they owe. It's a valid debt. It meets all sort of the statutory requirements of the laws in their states, and sort of in those cases, the best outcome possible, probably for most people, would in that case be sort of to settle and negotiate, um, and really to avoid that garnishment.
How do you think settlement compares to bankruptcy?
I don't. That's an interesting question. We know we see consumer debt cases making their way into bankruptcy court. We see sort of judgments making their way into bankruptcy court. We just don't know sort of what happened to sort of get that debt into bankruptcy court. So we don't necessarily know enough about sort of negotiate now, we'll avoid bankruptcy later, or anything like that. We just don't have enough data to sort of be able to prove that out.
Okay. And
I will say, like, most of the debts that we see in court too, right? The typical amount, so the median amount we see around the country is about $2,000. So half of all debt cases being filed in our court system are for $2,000 or less. 3/4 of them are for about $4,000 or less. From the states that we've looked at. So those sort of amounts on their own might not be enough to sort of make someone qualify or be eligible for bankruptcy, right? There's other financial situations, obviously they can be, but these sort of court, judgment debts in and of themselves generally don't meet sort of a level that would sort of help someone navigate the bankruptcy courts, at least as far as we can tell and what we can see.
right. And how does settlement compare to the other alternative, garnishment, like losing the case?
Yeah, I generally think settlements will be better for most people than getting a garnishment, right? Like a garnishment, you don't know when it's going to hit, right? Like one day you're going to be, waiting for that paycheck and 25% of it can be gone. You're going to be going to the bank or sorry, going to the grocery store to buy groceries, pay rent, and your bank account's going to be wiped out to zero. Or, you're going to have someone coming from the court knocking on your door and taking items out of your home that they think have value to them, right? Like generally that's sort of the most suboptimal outcome in these.
Right. Okay. Well, fascinating. Tell us a little bit more about the research that you've been doing.
Yeah, so for us, what we sort of do is go into states around the country and get as much court data as we can. So sort of when a court case is filed, this case management system that sort of builds a case and all the information related to a person's case is linked within it. What we do is sort of try to get the bulk data, so all of those cases, and really go through them. We sort of use we analyze the data itself. We sometimes will look at documents and things like that. So we'll look at thousands and thousands of case documents and PDFs and things like that to really sort of understand trends and what's going on. And sort of for us, at least coming to this space, we did find some things that sort of surprised us. One, the sort of typical debt being $2,000 or less. That's, sort of as an outsider to the sort of court system coming into this work, I wasn't expecting sort of that amount to be sort of where the middle of the road was for debt collection. The other thing we see, it's the top 10, top 20 plaintiffs in every state. So the companies filing all of these lawsuits, they're nearly all the same companies. Most of the time, they're either the largest credit card companies or they're debt buying companies who have sort of purchased these debts from someone else for pennies on the dollar. They're suing an individual for the full amount. State to state to state, regardless of sort of financial regulations in those states, regardless of court regulations about these companies and sort of how they have to operate, it's the same companies who manage to make it sort of to the top 10 in every state. And it's really sort of, for us at least, seeing a real rise in the debt buying industry in courts over the past 20, 30 years. And just like the volume of debt buying cases that are being sort of filed in courts. The other thing for people, and going to court has a lot of hidden costs. It gets expensive quickly. So it's not just the debt now that you originally might have owed someone. But now we're going to introduce other charges, right? You're going to have a filing fee that a plaintiff has paid that they're going to try to get back from you. There'll be charges for service of process, right? For a process server to come and serve someone in a case. There'll be attorney fees. There might be other costs that get assessed. And one of the things we've found in like many states is, the sort of very strange fees that we don't expect. In the state of Oregon, for example, we did some research and we saw there was a thing called a prevailing party fee, right? So if you lost your case, you had to pay a fee of $100 or $200 something to the other side just for the privilege of having lost your case. That was unique to Oregon. We haven't seen that in other states yet, but sort of like when we look at how much a court balloons a debt, it gets expensive very quickly. And sometimes, when you're seeing, $1,500, $2,000 debts, you're getting a lot of costs added on top of that can almost sort of double some of these debts in some cases for people.
Right. Wow. Crazy. Are the fee for losing your case? That doesn't sound fun. Are civil filing fees for defendants on your radar? That's one of the craziest things that we've seen.
Yeah. I think it's one of the interesting things, right? You've not just in many states got the filing fee that a plaintiff has paid, but you, the individual who's been sued, also then has to pay a fee to the court to even answer your case, to say, I want to come in and defend my case, or I want to come negotiate this. Like, you will oftentimes have to pay that fee, and I think that's certainly an area that deserves more attention, and it's something that keeps people out of the courts, right? And it's a barrier to getting people to participate in these cases. And one of the things that's interesting, at least to us, is we work closely, with people who file these lawsuits, whether that's creditors, attorneys, or the companies who are filing these lawsuits. And they talk all the time about wanting people to engage, wanting people to show up to court, wanting to be able to sort of negotiate with folks. And having that sort of answer fee, especially that sort of charge to answer a lawsuit, is a real impediment to getting people to sort of navigate the court system.
Big impediment. Yep. The biggest, I believe the states with the highest fees are California and Minnesota, where they can charge $435 in California to respond to a lawsuit.
Yeah, and it's not much better in Minnesota. It's right about the same.
Right. Okay. Well, great. Thanks for sharing a bit more on the research. I understand you've also made a debt settlement payment calculator tool. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up here for folks that are watching.
So,
can you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about, maybe just walk this through? We're looking at it on the screen on the webinar.
Excellent. Yeah. So this is an idea about sort of that I had from sitting in cases and watching settlements. It's just trying to help people figure out what a good settlement might look like for a debt that somebody owes. And so what we do here is sort of try to quickly do some math to figure out, if you owe a debt, can we find a point within that sort of repayment that helps balance out, paying off a debt fast enough that you're sort of going to be making big chunks into it and keeping ahead of the interest, but not having to pay off so much that it could impact the rest of your pocketbook. And so like the real idea here is trying to find that like sort of sweet spot for folks with a debt of where, that nice balancing point hits for folks. Obviously the best, without knowing anything about a person's financial situation, right? The best sort of advice for most people would be pay as much as you can and get these things paid off quickly. But typically we just don't know enough about a person's financial situation to sort of be able to help them really sort of calculate within their finances what to do. So this is a tool that can just take a basic judgment, and George, you might even want to just type something in here. We can sort of walk through it. In the judgment amount box, if you throw in, say, $1,600, that's a typical debt in the state of Michigan, and we throw, say, an 8% interest rate on there. At this point, it's going to ask you sort of like, how much would you like to pay every week? Sort of like in your mind, seeing a $1,600 debt, 8% interest rate, what do you think would be a sort of, decent weekly payment to be making? And say let's throw in $20 in there and just sort of say, if we pay $20 a week, what does it look like?
Okay, and then I'll hit calculate here.
Yeah, hit that calculate button and then sort of scroll down the page. You'll see it does some math in the background and says basically, if you're paying $20 a week, it's going to take you 86 weeks to pay this debt off. And you're going to end up paying $108 in interest on that $1,600 debt. Okay, so that's sort of where your head might have been at. What this then says is like, okay, if we were going to try to find the sweet spot for paying this debt back, we would propose you sort of pay $45 a week. That's going to pay this thing off in 37 weeks, and you're going to pay $46 in interest while you pay this debt off. And so, sort of the idea here behind this calculator is really, this is something I created in my own free time. It's not connected to my work, but it was just from sitting in these settlements and sort of like trying to figure out, like, is there a way to give people just a little bit of information, just sort of understand more about what they're signing up for, what they think they want to sign up for, and what like might be an ideal sort of place to sign up.
Is the interest rate in this case, is that supposed to be the interest rate on the original loan, or is that representing like a statutory interest rate, do you think?
That would be the interest rate on the judgment itself. So that would be the sort of like post-judgment interest that gets assigned,
Right.
or so it's not necessarily the original loan. Sometimes the interest rate from the original loan will be that interest rate. Other times it won't. There'll be sort of limits on sort of what courts are able to assess once sort of a case has
Right.
been filed.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, folks.
Yeah.
We reserve most of the time in this show for any questions that you have for us. You've all put quite a few questions into the chat, so let's see if we can't get into some of those questions here. And these questions might be for me, they might be for Lester. Feel free if you have any questions about his research or what he's seeing in the courts. Feel free to put a question in there about that. We also have Hannah and Yale, who are with Solo Suit. They'll be responding to some messages in the chat, just through the chat, and then we'll try to respond to some of them here verbally on video. And as we get into this, I just want to give our standard disclaimer, let you know that I am not a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. Solo Suit isn't the law firm where I'm providing legal advice. We're just doing a webinar. Lester's not a lawyer either, as far as I know. Okay, so we're not creating
I'm also not a lawyer.
Yep, great. Not creating an attorney-client relationship or anything like that here.
Yes. No legal advice.
Great. I've got a question from Aka. I have an active lawsuit with JP Morgan Chase for $17,000 and another with LVNV on behalf of SoFi for $37,000. Chase is offering a 25% reduction if they settle, and LVNV is offering a 50% reduction. What are your thoughts? Lester, you want to weigh in on that one?
I will weigh in, maybe not on that specific of what the best option there is, but I will say, debt buying companies, so LVNV is sort of one of the larger debt buying companies in the country. We see them being able to make much bigger settlements for people than other sorts of debts. And that's typically because they've purchased these debts, right, for pennies on the dollar. So, they might have spent, they might pay about 4%, 5%, 6%, depends on sort of the debts that they're buying. But, they're not buying a debt for the full amount. They're buying it for pennies and then suing you for the full amount. And so that gives them sort of a large area where they can be profitable as you sort of repay these debts. And so when you're looking at debt buying companies in particular, I think that's where you can sort of negotiate the largest percentage discounts on these sort of debts.
Sure. Yeah, and Aka, weighing in for Solo Suit, right? We find that most people want to settle the debts that they owe. We also, we see that's the best outcome, the best way to resolve a debt. So we definitely encourage people to go forward with settlement, resolution, work it out with the collector and try to get something resolved, right? I think from the collector's perspective, they're taking on this big asset, right? In this case, you're working with Chase, right? Chase is the creditor. They've taken on this risk to give you a loan. They're expecting it to be paid back. So you definitely see how settlement can work out and advance the interests of both parties here. 25% settlement with Chase is quite good. So the average settlement in the industry on a lawsuit debt is about 85%. So 25% discount is below that. So that's good. And average settlement right now on Solo Settle, our debt settlement marketplace, is about 70%. So if you're getting a 25% reduction, that's a pretty good place, and you can probably move forward with that. And then LVNV, if they're offering a 50% reduction, that's pretty huge, especially on a lawsuit. So pre-lawsuit debts settle quite a bit lower, but once the debt is in a lawsuit, the collector isn't going to be as willing to settle for a smaller amount because they've incurred quite a bit of cost by filing the lawsuit. So they've had to pay a law firm to file the lawsuit, and that costs quite a bit of money. So getting a 50% reduction with LVNV sounds like quite a winning outcome. But ultimately, right, you should do what you determine best. All right, we got a question from TM. I couldn't pay any bills for almost a year. 10 accounts are in collection now. One lawsuit was filed. I'm trying to avoid other lawsuits. Do you recommend debt consolidation firms?
That's an area that unfortunately I just don't know enough about to sort of give you advice on sort of debt consolidation firms and sort of what goes on in that industry. But yeah, I don't know, George.
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in on that. Yeah, debt consolidation firms. So there's a variety of options that kind of have a terminology that's used somewhat loosely. I would say, if you're in this space, if you're in this place, you're getting sued, you have a bunch of debts, you have a few options, right? You have Chapter 7 bankruptcy. That's like your debt gets discharged, it gets totally deleted. You have Chapter 13 bankruptcy. That's like a payment plan. That's not usually a very good option. Like most people just get on a payment plan and usually fail on the payment plan. So that oftentimes doesn't work out that great. You have solo settle, solo suit. You make it easy to respond and then get it settled. We're very different from a debt settlement firm. We're really not a debt settlement firm at all. We just connect the consumer with the collector to get the debt settled. Right? So we're connecting the two parties and establishing trust between them to help you guys get the debt settled. And then you have other things. You have like debt consolidation. What I would consider debt consolidation is where you get a new loan for all of your other loans. So let's say you have like 5 loans, 5 debts. You're going to get a new loan to finance all of those debts and turn it into a single payment. That can be a good option. You're probably going to get a very high interest rate on that new loan, but it's really just a matter of math. Like you'd have to do the math to figure out if it's a better deal to have a new loan with with this interest rate, making a single payment, or make payments on all these other 5 debts. Oftentimes a single payment is just a lot easier to manage, so it could very well be worth it. And then you have things like credit counseling, where you have like a credit counselor that gets you onto like some kind of a payment plan on pre-lawsuit debts. Those can be useful, but in my mind it seems like somewhat of a limited value there. And then you have traditional debt settlement firms as where you'll enroll all of your debts into this escrow account. You'll make payments on saving up to make a settlement, and then eventually, like 12 months down the road, maybe 24 months, you'll start getting some of these accounts settled over time. So those are some of the various options in this space. Up to you on what you want to go with. I'd say it totally depends on the debt consolidation firm, right? There's debt consolidation firms that are super sketch. There's debt consolidation firms that are totally legit. All right, so just you want to look into those things. Okay, we got a question from My Favorite Things. Can I go to Superior Court to file directly my answer to a debt lawsuit from Discovery Bank here in California? Yes, I'd say, yeah, if you want to show up and file in person, you can do that and just file it into the court in person.
Yeah, I think that would be probably the easiest way to sort of be able to respond to these lawsuits and to sort of move forward.
Uh, yep, yep. So you can file in person. You can also use solo suit to file, right? So we make it easy for you to file. You can pay us. We'll file the document for you. We got a question from Sid. I've been sued. I have filed with the court. Nice, good job. Sounds like you got the first thing taken care of. What happens to my lawsuit if I file Chapter 7 bankruptcy? So if you file Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the bankruptcy attorney you're working with should file a stay, which will pause the lawsuit, and then hopefully the debt lawsuit can get expunged. In bankruptcy, there are exceptions, like if the lawsuit is for like your house or something, like a mortgage debt or for tax debt or for student loans.
Yeah, and that's one I think too where you want to make sure you're communicating that with the court as well, or double checking that the court's receiving that communication from the bankruptcy courts.
That's a good tip. Yep, you definitely want to make sure yourself that things are moving along well. Nice. We got a question from a pig farmer. Yep, I've been sued and they got a default judgment, and now I have a lien on my homestead. What's your experience with liens, Lester? Any light you can shine on liens?
They happen. They happen in many states. Oftentimes, you won't. Well, you likely don't find yourself sort of getting foreclosed on for having a judgment lien against you all the time, but it could happen in some states, and it could happen in depending on sort of the laws of the state where you live. So there's not sort of universal advice there, but liens are a tool used to sort of recoup debts that people have. And we see plenty of the large plaintiffs who are filing these lawsuits also seek out liens on people's properties. So when you do go to sell your home, or you do go to refinance your home, or if they are in a state where they can force the sale of your home, they will be able to sort of get recouped.
Do you have a sense of how common liens are in post judgment?
Yeah, I don't have great numbers on how common they are. We do see it. I wouldn't say we see it a ton, right? Like, I don't think it's something that happens with most lawsuits, but like it certainly happens with many lawsuits. I just don't have good numbers on it. But when we do look at sort of property records, we will look and sort of see, companies, debt buying companies and things like that with liens on a person's property. I think the sort of first thing that has to happen is that you have to, sort of own property that they can put a lien on. And so that sort of eliminates a segment of people who are getting sued for a debt collection lawsuit who maybe don't own their own home and things like that. But yeah, we definitely see it. We just don't have sort of great data on how often it happens. We also know sort of anecdotally that sometimes those liens can also get sold to other people. So to sort of confuse the situation even more, you might find another company one day has sort of purchased the lien against your home.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Well, we've got time for one more question, and then we wrap up at since it's half past the hour. Got a question from Holly. Good evening. I have court in December. A hospital is suing me for about $2,300. The lawyers are taking me to court on the hospital's behalf. What kind of settlement do you think I should offer? Lester, do you have any sense of like, is medical debt, is that something that people are commonly sued for?
Yeah, medical debt's a sort of huge driver of lawsuits for people. Not always from the original hospital itself, right? Like sometimes we see it from debt buyers and from credit cards that people put things on, but like a good chunk of debt collection lawsuits will be hospital debt or some sort of medical debt of some kind, dentists, doctors, whatever sort of things like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we see a large portion, I think in the state of Utah, actually, about a third of the debts we looked at in that state were related to a medical bill.
1/3.
Yeah.
And that could be, would that include if the lawsuit is for a medical bill as well as if it is related to a medical bill, like if the consumer paid a bill on their credit card and then they're being sued for that credit card? Would
So
that be included?
it would have ignored in that case the credit card one, so it's probably higher than that. The 1/3 of medical debt cases in Utah was related to original hospitals sort of suing a person, or medical providers suing a person, and then debt buyers suing a person for a medical debt where we could see in the case documents it was a medical debt, or third-party debt collectors suing for a medical debt in their own name, where we could sort of like look through the documents and say, yes, this is a sort of a hospital system and things like that. So yeah, medical debt, at least in many states that we're looking at, 20-30% of the overall docket is definitely medical debt. And then we know, obviously, because of credit cards and things like that, it's even higher. One of the fun facts about credit cards is even your medical credit card, when it goes to court, like a medical credit card, you might take out at a doctor's office or a dentist to pay for a procedure. That will show up in court as a credit card debt. That won't show up in court as a medical debt.
And these are like the situations where you're on the hospital bed, right? You just it's like broke your leg, and then somebody comes in and asks you to sign for a credit card to move forward with like a procedure.
Right? Yeah. It's usually to move forward with a procedure. It's not always. I don't think in like that might be maybe an extreme situation, but maybe you've got a toothache and you go to the dentist and you can't afford it, and the dentist says, hey, here's this credit card that you could sign up for, that'll take care of it. And yeah, so those are the ones that we sort of see that gets commingled with other credit cards and things like that.
Fascinating. Okay, yeah. So Holly, right? You're being sued for $2,300. What kind of settlement? Right. The settlement ranges that we see are, if you're being sued, it's probably going to settle between 50 to 85%. If you use Solo Settle's marketplace to get the thing settled, our average is 70%. It's a big range. Like sometimes people settle for zero. Like we've had debts get totally forgiven on the platform for like severe medical hardship. Sometimes debts settle for 100% of the face value because people just know they owe the debt and they just want to pay the whole thing. So you can move over to Solo Settle and you can make an offer to the collector to get that settled. So that's kind of the range that you'd be working with the $2,300 debt. All right, hope you get that all covered and paid off. All right, folks, thanks for showing up today. Very glad to be here. Lester, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Is there a place that people can go to find out more about your research or to follow you online?
Yeah, sure. So if you're interested in sort of the research that we do at Pew, pewtrust.org, that's PEW, trust.org/modern legal, will take you to our website that has all of our sort of work on courts and communities that we work on.
Nice. Let me just put that into the chat for everybody on here. All right, just putting that in here. And there you go. You have pewtrusts.org/modern legal. You can check out what it looks like, understand the landscape better for debt lawsuits.